Planet Institute.
Hello, and welcome to R&D Unplugged, a podcast from the Learning Planet Institute dedicated to discussing with researchers on the impact of their work in a simple way. My name is Gerard. Today's guest is Chloé Mercier. She's a research scientist at INRIA. Welcome, Chloé. Chloé, your research is focusing on using AI methods to better understand human learning and creativity with perspectives in education. This is a subject we are in love with at the Learning Planet Institute. But before we get to your subject, let me start by asking a less conventional question. If your research had a theme song, what would it be and why?
So that was not an easy question. I ended up choosing Human Behavior by Björk.
Excellent choice.
If you ever get close to a human and human behavior.
So I chose this song because, first, the title speaks for itself, Human Behavior. That's the subject of what I study, because I study human learning processes. And what I really like with this song is that she kind of describes human behavior the way a scientist maybe would be, by saying it's very chaotic and I understand what they are doing. There's really no logic. And what I do is trying to find some logic and some patterns within those behaviors. I also think that she's a very creative singer and whose music is both, at the same time, very organic, very instrumental, with a very strong voice. And she also uses many electronic instruments, and it has a very futuristic sound to it. So I really like this combination of inspiration from past and future. And finally, if you have a look at the clip, it's a clip by Michel Gondry, who is also a very creative person. And I think it has a very handmade vibe to it and low-tech. And it embodies maybe approaches that we might talk about later, I don't know, but STEAM approaches. So the way that we can incorporate creativity into science.
Excellent. Thank you for that choice. I love that song. What inspired you, Chloé, to pursue this particular research topic?
So I've always found very interesting the way humans think and learn and create, especially in children. When you have a look at children, it's kind of amazing the way they see the world and the way they learn from everything that they explore. And personally, even though I come from a computer science background, I really had a personal need for interdisciplinarity. I really enjoy combining formal methods with human and social sciences, for instance, in this case, education and learning sciences. And there's also a strong desire to connect science and art or humanities in general. And I think this could be also a lever to maybe encourage girls to come from the science field more and show that there's actually not much of a gap between those disciplines.
Beautiful. Next question is, how does your research contribute to the issues that the world is facing? And there are many of them.
The UNESCO recommends that we develop 21st century skills to face such challenges. So by 21st century skills, we mean creativity, collaboration, problem solving, including creative problem solving, computational thinking as well. And so my research tries to better understand what those skills are all about and what are the cognitive processes involved in those skills in order to better understand them first and then maybe teach them to our future students and future citizens.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more in details the main purpose or objective of your research? Can you give us an example for us to understand?
Yeah. So, for instance, creativity, it's often seen as a trait, something stable among individuals and also something a bit mysterious, when actually it's also a process that can be formalized and supported and taught, and to some extent at least. Some people will be maybe naturally more gifted at it, but still there is a margin and an extent to which it can be taught. So what I try to do is to formalize it in operational ways using computational methods, so methods that come from computer science.
Can you give an example of a method or a research setting that you use?
So for instance, when studying creativity, so we know that we can decompose the process into several phases. So there is first the preparation to the problem, for example, in the case of creative problem solving. And after this preparation phase, there will be a phase of generating some ideas, which is called the divergent phase, and then a phase of selecting the most relevant ideas, which is called the convergent phase. And so these phases can also be approached using computational paradigms. For example, the reinforcement learning paradigms, which comes from the field of machine learning and robotics, for example. This paradigm distinguishes between exploration modes, where the agent is trying to gather as much information as possible in the environment, and exploitation phases, where the agent tries to reuse some knowledge that they already have to navigate the environment. And so we can, to some extent, try to model the convergent and divergent thinking phase using this exploration-exploitation paradigm, even though it's a bit more complicated than that, because divergent and convergent thinking phase are also interrelated phases, and we cannot really completely associate convergent thinking with exploitation and divergent thinking to exploration, but it gives us a first stage of modeling the process.
Thank you for that. The next question, still about your research, is we would like to understand a little bit better what were some of the key findings or insights from your research. Can you detail them for us a little bit?
So my research tries to connect fields that do not necessarily dialogue with each other, namely learning science, cognitive science in general, computer science, and also insights from neuroscience. So some of those fields already communicate with another, but maybe not the three at once, especially when we associate education to it. So one of the insights from my research was to find some connections that were consistent within these three fields, these three disciplines. And then something that maybe surprised me at first, so it's not a key finding from my research in particular, it was something that was already present in the literature, but I didn't know about it, is that creativity, is not just a stable trait, it can be taught, as I said. And also, we need to take into account the adequate part into the definition of a creative solution. It's not just something that is novel, it's also something that is appropriate. And we often tend to forget that part.
Definitely. For me, I would have said it's novel, and I would have forgotten about the appropriate part. Thanks for that indication. Moving on, I would like to ask you how you make the bridge between your research and real life. Maybe you have an anecdote or any specific story where your research or your field maybe directly impacted or changed somebody's life. I know it's a very ambitious question.
Yeah, no. So far, I don't think my research has changed anyone's life. I don't have this pretension. However, maybe more my teaching activities. I mean, without changing some lives, it's always very rewarding when people come to you after a class or even after a popularization activity and tell you, I finally understood something, whether it's about AI or anything, but especially for such fields that are often talked about but not much popularized, and people don't always know what's going on behind the scenes and the hidden clockworks of the mechanisms. I think it's very important to diffuse this kind of knowledge, and it's very rewarding when it actually works.
Yeah, I'm thinking of maybe you can tell us more about ways that your research impact the real world, the real life of people? Are there examples of implementation of your research into the real world? I don't know, maybe into the classroom or somewhere else?
Sometimes my research and teaching are not directly correlated. I think what can be interesting in my research is the formalization part, because it also helps in finding new ways of evaluating, for example, by defining new metrics. So, for example, one thing I did in my research we discussed was to define a distance to compare between several states within the resolution of a problem-solving task. And so this kind of distance can be interesting to evaluate the process and measure the performance of an individual in such a task. This can be interesting in that sense. But when I do teach, I don't necessarily use that directly, because there is also some programs to follow and some guidelines to stick to. But I still have some degree of freedom in some subjects. And so, for instance, I was able to implement some new practices in one of the courses that I teach. It's a course that I teach at the Université Côte d'Azur in a hybrid format. And in my case, it's only an online video conference format. And it was quite hard to find some ways of teaching the concept that I teach that are quite abstract, that are about AI, to a public of students that are more from an education background. So it was interesting in that sense to develop new techniques, and I really like this part of my work as well.
Wonderful. You talked about AI. I cannot help but ask you whether you are an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to AI. These days, it looks like we have two categories of people: those who believe AI will kill everybody and go rogue and exterminate the human being, and those who are much more optimistic and who feel that we master AI and it can be used to serve the people and to build a better future. Do you have any opinion, maybe not black and white, but any opinion? Where do you stand?
I worry more about the humans that are behind the AI than by the AI itself. If the AI decides to kill everybody, it's because, some people have given it some ways to do so. So I would say I'm neither optimistic, neither pessimistic with regard to AI. I think it very much depends on the use. I'm a bit pessimistic about the environmental impact of AI, because the directions that we are taking at the moment, I don't think that they are the right directions to take regarding AI, and there would be probably other paths that would be just as interesting, scientifically speaking, and with regard to the uses as well, that might be might have a much better impact on the environment. And it's a bit sad that we are not necessarily taking those directions at the moment. But I'm still a bit hopeful.
What about AI and education, AI and learning? What are some of the ways you can see this develop? Because definitely AI is disrupting the education systems currently. What are some of your thoughts?
Yes, so indeed, especially with the emergence of generative AI, we have seen some questions that have been raised recently, but I think that in a way those questions should have been raised before generative AI even occurred. Questions regarding the evaluation of competencies, for instance, or the alignment between activities, learning activities, and the learning outcomes that we want for our students. And in a way, generative AI raises interesting questions in education, because it also interrogates the current practices that we have, and interrogates the need to introduce more transversal skills into the curriculum, so creativity, critical thinking, etc. And I think those questions should be raised anyway. So it's a nice opportunity, even though it might be a bit quick. I mean, everything goes very fast and it's hard to adjust. We might need more time, but at least some interesting questions are raised. And again, it depends on the users. I mean, it's both an opportunity and a threat. It's a threat because, of course, people might use generative AI without critical thinking and delegating the production, which, of course, induces also a cognitive debt. And you can't really learn if you're not actively engaged in the task and if you delegate everything to the system. But there are other ways to use AI and even generative AI, and you could use it in a more Socratic way in order to explore new solutions, or maybe try to push the limits of the reasoning of the AI, which is not exactly reasoning, but I mean, it's a form of reasoning that emerges from those computations. And so I think if it's used in that way, it can be quite interesting. And it also it is also an opportunity to maybe reduce some gaps if it's used correctly, and if we educate our students to use it at home, for instance, it could help students who cannot have access to a tutor. And so AI can fill in this role. Yeah. So yeah, there are opportunities, but we definitely need some AI literacy courses in order to educate people to use it.
Great. I want to take a step back. At LPI, we often say we want the best students for the world, not the best students in the world. So if I'm a young 20-year-old and I want to be the best possible version of myself for the world and contribute to make a better world, why should I engage in research is my first question. And my second question is, why should I choose your research topic?
So engaging in research in general, I think, is very formative also for critical thinking. And we are desperately in need of critical thinking at the moment. And there is some kind of fear and even defiance against science at the moment. There is some distrust with regards to science, because I think people are also not necessarily familiar enough with the scientific process and the scientific method, which does include some part of doubt. It's important to include this part of doubt in order for the scientific process to work. And so there isn't a scientific truth that is fixed, but science evolves step by step, experiment after experiment. And I think if we were able to maybe explicitize this more and familiarize the general public to the scientific method, and maybe raise more actions for citizen science and participative science, and include the general public more into the scientific process in general, it would probably help with critical thinking and improving trust towards science. And I think this is something that is quite important, especially at the moment, and for democracy, learning how to think and learning how to revise our thoughts and to not necessarily trust our emotions, but rather try to examine all information that we have at the moment, and confronting the sources and comparing what's happening with what has happened in the past and so on. So yeah, I think it's important to learn this process of how to think. So that was for science in general, scientific research.
Now your research topic.
my research topic. Well, I'm also in this topic because I enjoy it a lot. I mean, I take a lot of pleasure in studying how people learn and how people create. So if you are someone that is willing to apply formal methods, if you want to apply formal methods to a very human-centered topic, including observing how people create, this could be a topic for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chloé. That wraps up today's episode of the R&D Unplugged podcast. I'm Shahab, your host. Huge thank you to our guest Chloé Mercier for sharing insights and expertise with us Also, a big thank you to all of our listeners who joined for today's episode. R&D Unplugged is a Learning Planet Institute podcast. This episode was produced by Annalena Neurohr and Sharp Nastar, by recording by Edouard Picard, and editing by Jean-Marc Stevin. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find all of our podcasts and further information on our website at learningplanetinstitute.org/podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Learning Planet Institute.